Indianapolis, Indiana, the site of Big Ten Media Days. It's day 2 here at Lucas Oil Stadium, and we've got a cavalcade of stars getting ready to come join us as we give you all of what we're seeing, hearing, and thinking from Big Ten Media Days. And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Danny Cannell, that's Tom Fornelli, that's Bud Elliott. I'm Chip Patterson, coming to you live on CBS Sports Network. And gentlemen, we have a lot to get into. We've got, UCLA, Iowa, Michigan State, USC, Nebraska, and Penn State. But, since we were last with everybody, we also got a chance to talk to Bret Bielema. We got a chance to talk to Wisconsin coach Luke Fickell, Rutgers coach Greg Schiano, and so many more. Danny, from day 1, before we look ahead to the rest of day 2, what was one of your biggest takeaways from the first day of Big Ten Media Days?
I mean, my biggest takeaway was the drink orders last night at dinner for the Cover 3 crew, which was a ton of fun. I mean, you learn a lot about people by their drink orders, so we'll have to do that maybe in a Q&A for social only. But from day 1, Ohio State, preseason favorite, not only to win the Big Ten, but potentially win the national championship. We talked about the pressure Ryan Day faces. I think it is noticeable when you watch Ryan Day, when you hear him talk, that the stress is there. Yeah, it's tight. Yeah. And it's normal. Like, we know the pressure that he's under in Columbus from that fan base. But, man, I feel like he has the weight of the world on his shoulders. And, my goodness, they better beat Michigan when they play them at home. And they better at least come very close to these expectations that we talked about. But I just felt like there was an aura about him that was just wound extremely tight. And maybe it's an intensity, too, that's always there with Ryan Day. But I do think the expectations are – not the players. They were loose, relaxed, confident. But from Ryan Day, he knows what's at stake this season.
Yeah, I was about to say, we had Emeka Egbuka on the show yesterday. We had an interview with Jack Sawyer for HQ. And the players are just very confident and calm, and they seem like they know what's expected of them, and they're very confident they're going to be able to execute on that and compete for a Big Ten title. But I'm with you. There is a certain kind of tension around Ryan Day right now.
I think it's the expectations on Wisconsin. Everybody's expecting a year 2 jump under Luke Fickell. I think if you look at his track record, that should be expected. And the roster is unquestionably better than it was last year. But also with the integration of the new teams and the dissolution of these divisions, now Wisconsin doesn't get that old Big Ten West schedule. They have to play a lot of the heavyweights from the East. They also have Alabama come to town. Like, Wisconsin could be a lot better team than they were last year, like a lot better, and still have the same record. So they're going to have to be a heck of a lot better if they want to actually show improvement in that win column.
And coaches never, ever forget. I mean, how about when you're asking Luke Fickell about, what coaches give you nightmares, and he's all of a sudden, it was like, well, there was this game at Cincinnati, there was this game when I was at Ohio State. Just the level of coaching in this conference, when we get a chance to speak to some of them, it's just so impressive. You think about what Bret Bielema accomplished at Wisconsin. You've got him at Illinois, and of course, we've got some stars coming up a little bit later on in the show as well. We will be having Lincoln Riley join the show. We are scheduled to have Deshaun Foster join the show, and Penn State coach James Franklin just finished his time on the podium. He'll be stopping by here as well. So, Bud, of the teams that we've got here today, what are you looking forward to?
I want to hear about the player development of James Franklin. It's another new offensive coordinator with Andy Kotelnicki coming in from Kansas. Like, how does he mesh with Penn State's young quarterback room? How does he mesh with the new receivers they've brought in? Like, I think Penn State's defense at this point in his tenure there is pretty bankable. They're going to have nasty S rushers. They're going to have pretty good cover guys. Can they score enough points to actually make the college ball playoff? Because in many prior years, Penn State is the team that would have made the 12-team playoff that just narrowly missed that 4-team window. So can they live up to expectations? Can they actually make the 12-team playoff this year?
I will say my prediction for Penn State's offense this year is, last year my favorite run game to watch was Michigan. This year I think Penn State, with what they do and Andy Kotelnicki in that offense, they're going to make a run maybe for be the most entertaining rushing offense in the Big Ten. As far as what I'm looking forward to here today, I want to talk to Lincoln Riley, because USC we know the storylines. Last year was a very bad season for the Trojans. They finished 8-5. The defense was awful. He's completely overhauled the defensive staff, but he's lost Caleb Williams, his Heisman-winning quarterback, who went with the first pick in the draft. In comes Miller Moss, who does not have a ton of experience, and this is also a team that, there were a lot of big-name kind of quarterbacks in the portal that were available, and we thought USC was going to be going after them.
Great call.
They didn't. So I want to talk to Lincoln about the confidence he has in the guys he has in that room, particularly Miller Moss, who we will also have on the show today.
Matt Rule, Nebraska, year 2. We see that jump historically with him wherever he's been. I want to talk a little Dylan Raiola, who I think there's a healthy balance that you have to walk because everyone's excited about him. You got him to come to Nebraska, which was half the battle, but managing expectations because everyone thinks he's going to step in there and be the savior. He doesn't have to be the savior. He just has to be adequate because that was way subpar, the quarterback play and the offense for Nebraska last year. So I'm excited to see kind of how he handles that. Does he temper expectations? Does he lean into them? So I can't wait to talk to Matt Rule about that.
So Matt Rule just said up at the podium he thinks the Big Ten should have 4 teams in the 12-team college football playoff
starting already.
Single season. So just real fast off the top of your head, do you think 4 teams from the Big Ten make the new expanded college football playoff?
Yes.
Yes?
And I think the reason is because the quality of quarterback play from teams 5 to 18 is not good enough consistently to jump up and upset some of the top 4 teams. And I think the teams that do have the better quarterbacks, like Purdue with Hudson Card, they don't have the players around them to pull the upset. So I think the top 4 teams are going to have really good records, and I do think the Big Ten will get 4 teams into the playoffs because I just don't see the upsets pulled consistently enough from teams 5 to 18.
I feel very confident that Ohio State and Oregon will get in. Like, of all the teams in the league, those are the 2 I would pick first. I think Penn State's got a very realistic shot of getting in, depending on how the offense goes. It's trying to find that 4th team. Will it be Michigan, which is coming on a rebuilding year, coming off of a national title, or will it be somebody who can take advantage of their schedule, like an Iowa or a Rutgers, somebody who you don't see coming? I do think the Big Ten can get 4 teams in the playoff. Will they? I don't know.
If they get 4, the SEC's getting 4 because, they're not going to play second fiddle to the Big Ten, so that's 8 spots.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't think it's that crazy because then that's 3 left over for the Big 12 and ACC, right? My math is correct, and then 1 for the G5. So, yeah, I think 4 probably is around where they are, but I totally agree with you guys. I know we're celebrating the Big Ten and we're talking about, the new teams that are coming in here. A little bit top-heavy, and I think it'll take some time for some of that talent, for NIL to kind of settle and for some of that talent to spread out. But those 4 teams at the top, they are much better. So I'm curious to see if we see some of those upsets that normally we might. Maybe they don't come, and that helps the top of the conference get those teams in.
It is one of my most intriguing storylines to follow because Penn State has been one of the most successful programs of the college football playoff era with 0 college football playoff appearances. And if you go back and you look where Penn State finished, you're like, oh, well, if we had the 12-team playoff this year, they'd be in. I think I went back and reworked it as like 4 college football playoff appearances if we had had the 12-team model since it started in 2014. That's pressure. That's expectations. It is, okay, hope you fix the offense because if Big Ten's getting 4 in and Penn State's not 1, then things did not go well. So it is going to be it was nice to hear Matt Rule. Of course, he's politicking. He's promoting the league. He's doing what he should do, what any Big Ten coach wants to do. But then you start running the math and you say, okay, big season on deck for James Franklin and the Nittany Lions.
And I think to Danny's point, like you wouldn't think the SEC would get less than the Big Ten. But there is certainly a scenario where the SEC beats itself up enough, right? Like, I don't think Oklahoma's going to go to the playoff. I don't think Tennessee's going to go to the playoff. But they could. And their quarterbacks, like quarterbacks 6, 7, 8, 9 in the SEC, are way better than what the Big Ten has. So you could have a lot of 4-loss SEC teams. And like a 4-loss SEC team, guys, it ain't going to jump a 2-loss Big Ten team. Like Greg Sankey can politic till the cows come home. It's just not going to matter. So you could have SEC chaos where they only get 3.
Would you say that Greg Sankey could jump up and down and scream about getting into the playoff?
Yeah, he could. Yeah, he could. But he says that's not what he does, right? Of course not. That's definitely not what he does. Well, Danny mentioned Dylan Raiola, and he is the key for Nebraska taking that jump and rejuvenating an offense that was among the worst in the Big Ten statistically last year. What are the other pieces that Nebraska needs to put together to have a successful season? We'll get into that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network, day 2 of Big Ten Media Days here at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. And one of the teams here today is one of the biggest brands in the history of college football, and that is the Nebraska Cornhuskers. It's a big year for Matt Rule, as we mentioned earlier. He normally takes a jump once he gets to that year 2, and there's a lot of confidence, in part because of the arrival of 5-star quarterback Dylan Raiola. So Bud, I got to ask you first from the recruiting side, the prospect side. We remember there was Ohio State was in the mix. Georgia is in the mix. We got a family connection. But what do you remember and what do you expect from Dylan Raiola in terms of what he was like as a high school star?
Sure. So he's a guy that transferred around a lot. Some people wanted to ding him for that, but honestly, I don't, because a lot of the transfers were related to his seasons being shut down via COVID rules in certain states. So he always performed pretty well in high school. In camps, he showed big-time tools. It's a big-frame guy. There's easy velocity. He doesn't have to put all of his body into his throws. And I think the family connection, the ability, looking at the Nebraska depth chart, to come in and be the starter from day one and enter a situation that I actually think is pretty favorable to break in a freshman quarterback. I'm excited to see it, but he has all the tools that you would see of a top-level quarterback. And that's why we had him rated so highly.
Yeah, and I think he's a crucial part of their season, because if you watch Nebraska last year in Rule's first season, the quarterback play was a serious issue that they had with both between Jeff Sims and Heinrich Harburg. Too many turnovers. Now, I don't know if having a true freshman coming in to play quarterback is really going to do a lot to alleviate the turnover problem, because that is always an issue with young quarterbacks. But it was just they were so one-dimensional in offense because opposing defenses did not really respect either of those guys' ability to throw the ball down the field. So Raiola comes in. He has that arm. Like you said, he's got the easy velo. So this is a situation where I think the Nebraska we see this year with Raiola, even though he's young and he's going to have speed bumps, I think they're going to be a much more dynamic offense and much more difficult to stop.
Couple things. Dylan Raiola, when you watch him play, we just saw that video, but I'm talking more about the spring game. He wears number 15.
I'll fall in love with the spring game.
He wears number. Oh, me too. Me too. But he wears number 15. He trains with Patrick Mahomes. The throwing motion, the mechanics, the style of play is very similar to Patrick Mahomes. I don't want to heap those types of expectations on him.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Patrick Mahomes.
Hopefully he wins more than Mahomes won at Texas Tech, but we'll see. The quarterback play last year, they combined for 10 touchdowns and 16 interceptions. It was atrocious. I mean, we joked about, was it Iowa or Nebraska who had worse quarterback play? He doesn't have to be a hero. And I think he'll understand that. I think Matt Rule will have him coached up to be that. 5 one-possession games last year that they ended up losing. I think he's the difference. And I don't think he's going to walk in and win the Heisman, but I think he's going to be a quarterback that makes them a threat throughout the course of the season, and it's not a liability.
Danny, you mentioned all the picks. They also had 18 fumbles for the quarterback position. Like, Nebraska was a total dumpster fire turnover fest from that position. If you look at it, like, to me, it's similar to Ohio State. Like, do we know that Dylan's going to come in and be awesome? No. But much like we think Will Howard is an upgrade over Colin McCord, or at least I do, I'm very confident that Dylan is better than whatever they ran out last year. And I think the pieces around him are much better, including on the coaching staff. Like, look, we first guessed the hire of Marcus Satterfield by Matt Rule. Like, I know it's his boy, but like, his track record in college is horrendous. Now they got Glenn Thomas in there working with the quarterbacks. I'd like to see a little more Glenn Thomas influence in this offense, or anything else than what we saw for the last couple of years and throughout Satterfield's career. So I'm really hopeful for this offense, because I think they will have some coaching changes there.
Tony White also stays.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's one of the best defensive coordinators in the entire country, and you're able to lock that down. Tom, what makes Nebraska's defense good, and what was the real strength last year that you think can carry over to help them find success? So, because that's the compliment for Dylan Raiola. Like, what helps a freshman quarterback? Not having to save the day and being able to rely on that defense. What makes Nebraska's defense good in your eyes?
I think when you watched them last year, they had good players, but there was nobody who truly stood out as like, oh, this guy's a superstar. This guy's going to be a first-round pick. But they were well coached. They were typically in the right spot at the right time, and they tackled, which is my favorite thing that any defense can do. When the first guy gets there and brings them down, that's typically a good sign that you don't see a whole lot of. But I think going into this year, why I'm really confident that they might be better this season is when you go through that depth chart and look at the starters. Senior, redshirt senior. There's so much experience on this unit that this is a side of the ball that they can rely on, and which will help alleviate the pressure on Raiola in the offense, because they might not have to score a whole lot of points to win games.
Let's take a look at the schedule that Nebraska is going to face this year.
You guys have heard my prediction, right?
No.
For Nebraska?
Oh, yeah.
All right, what is it?
6-0 when they go to Columbus, October 26th.
Ooh, so that would be a win against UTEP, win
Utah's
against
got them
Colorado.
beating Illinois. Are you crazy?
You get a win against Northern Iowa.
Isn't that 7 though?
No, I think it's 6, right?
Yeah.
Oh, no, it may.
No, 7, Danny.
7 if they beat Indiana.
7-0.
7-0.
And in the
7-0.
top 15 if they go that.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, on the road at the shoe, but then it gets real. Like, that's when then you find out what the upside is. I think they still beat UCLA at home, and then it's like, could they be a surprise team in the Big Ten? if they pulled up a few upsets on the back end of the season. And some teams, Wisconsin, Iowa, we talked about Wisconsin yesterday, Iowa today, that have a lot of question marks around themselves. And then it's one of those, if you can get off. Now, I also wouldn't be shocked if they lost to Colorado. You mentioned that wouldn't surprise me, but I think they're going to put it together this season. I think it will be that step forward that Matt Rule looks. And if they start winning some of those one-possession games, so much of this is mental, because there's even a hangover effect from the Scott Frost era. Remember, there were so many one-possession games. Like, why can't they win? If they believe in their coach, if they believe in the play calling, if they believe in their quarterback, and they start seeing the W's and they get a couple close wins, they can put some of those ghosts of years past behind them.
I think if you look at that schedule, if you're going to beat Nebraska, you have got to throw the ball, right? I love Tommy Hill at the one corner. They do have some questions in their secondary. I think I have a little bit of questions about pass rush. But up front, it's just straight grown-ass men, dude. I mean, 310, 335, like big guys that you cannot move. So a lot of those teams on that schedule probably do not have the passing game to take advantage of Nebraska's weaknesses, right? Now, Colorado does. That's the scary one. You better get that defense right early, because we know Shador and all those guys, they'll throw it around on him, but maybe they can push Colorado around on the other side. Some of these other teams, Tom, you're an Illinois guy, maybe Luke Altmaier can carve him, but that game is in Lincoln.
It's
so
in Lincoln.
I don't know.
Tough, yeah. Another thing they need to improve on, we haven't even brought up yet, they need to learn how to kick field goals. One of the reasons that they were losing all those one-score games is they were very bad. They only made 60% of their field goals last season, which is, not. It's maybe for the video game. For the video game, it's better than any of us can do. But for real life, you need to be a little bit better than that.
They were also dead last in the country in Bill Connolly's punt return success rate. Can you just adequately return some punts? Don't fumble them. That would help a ton.
Yeah, we got to get the whoopsie daisy rate down.
Yeah.
That is incredibly important. Tom, what kind of record do you think we're going to see from Nebraska this year? What are the realistic range of outcomes? I know Danny's already out here 7-0 out the gate. I'm sure that's 10-2.
They're 6-1 with a 28-point loss to Illinois at that point. But I would say, realistically, it's one of those things we've been doing every offseason for years. We're putting these expectations on the Cornhuskers, and they have failed to meet them. But I look at this team, I look at the roster, and I think if Dylan Raiola just doesn't have to be a superstar, just has to be a solid player at the quarterback spot, this is a team that should win at least 7 games, and I would say could win 8, finish in that 8-4 range.
I think 8-4.
8-4?
Yeah, I like that they get the bye week before they go to Indiana, because that is a team that maybe have the potential to throw it around on. They got to get that Colorado game early. The back half is tough, but you don't know what USC is going to be like depth-wise when they go play them in November. Maybe Nebraska has better depth than USC does. I think 8-4 is probably the most likely outcome for me.
Well, that's a jump. That's a jump. So, is Nebraska a sleeper team? Coming up on the other side, we're going to take all the top dogs. We're going to take all the favorites. We're going to throw them out. Who should we have our eye on as a potential sleeper in the Big Ten in 2024? We'll get into all that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network, day 2 of Big Ten Media Days from Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. All right, let's take the favorites. We're going to throw them out. Okay, so if I say you can't pick Ohio State, you can't pick Oregon, you can't pick Penn State, and you cannot pick the reigning national champion Michigan Wolverines, those 4 teams are gone. You've got 14 teams left to pick. Danny, let's get a sleeper pick for 2024 in the Big Ten.
This is just becoming the Nebraska hour if we do that, because I'm going to go with them. I do think Matt Rule is the type of coach where he's got buy-in from the players, and I think they realize how close they were last year with the 5-1 possession games. I do think Dylan Raiola is a massive upgrade at the quarterback position, which isn't saying a ton, but I do buy into the talent. And I think actually the movement through high school actually helps him step into a locker room, be more comfortable with new players, step into a leadership role. Love what I saw the spring game. I think Nebraska is that team. I already said they're going to be 7-0 when they go to Columbus. That'll be the surprise of the season if they're just there. But I think they could possibly, surprise a lot of people throughout the season.
I'm going to go with USC. I just think that, we had talked about this with the SEC, and I've been on this plane or this train where I feel like Oklahoma is just completely forgotten about because everybody's talking about Texas. And it's like Oklahoma's been pretty good itself, and they've been, pretty successful. And I feel like it's kind of a similar thing in the Big Ten where we're talking about Oregon as the newcomer, the guys with the, they're the second favorite to win the conference. We talk about Washington because they were in the title game last year. And USC, if you look at the 4 programs coming in, this is the one that has historically won the most. It has the national titles. It has the Heisman Trophy winners. And when you look at this schedule, yes, they start the season with LSU, but that's not a conference game, so you could toss that out. You get Michigan on the road, that's tough, but you get Penn State at home. And more important than anything, you know who's not on that schedule? Ohio State and Oregon. So I look at this squad as a team. If Lincoln Riley is able to work his Lincoln Riley magic with Miller Moss at quarterback that we have seen him do over and over again with his quarterbacks, and if that defense shows any kind of improvement, they don't even have to be good. They just have to be kind of below average compared to where they were last year. It would be a huge step forward for them, and I think they could compete.
Quick follow on that. So we saw Lincoln Riley rework the defensive staff. D'Anton Lynn comes in. What does he need to do to be able to create that kind of improvement you're looking for?
Well, I mentioned when we were talking Nebraska last segment how I loved the fact that the guy that got there first usually made the tackle. If D'Anton Lynn can teach USC Trojan defenders how to tackle somebody, that would be a tremendous first step because you didn't see a whole lot of it last year.
The UCLA defense that he came from was great last year. It was excellent. And so you go to your crosstown rival, you poach him, you bring him over. I'd like that is what we ask coaches to do. So if they can put it together, I mean, they certainly have the offense and traditionally have under Lincoln Riley. But, Sleeper?
You go first.
Okay. I'm going to go with wow, this scene's a little bit sneaky. All right, I'm going to go with the Iowa Hawkeyes. You look at the outlook for the Big Ten, they're probably like 5th. I'm not having to go deep down the board to be able to go grab them. But when you're making the change of the offense and you've got not just 1, but 2 quarterbacks with Big Ten starting experience, it's like you've got that Cade McNamara health insurance kind of with Brendan Sullivan coming over from Northwestern. And the defense, you talk about looking up and down a depth chart and you're just like, senior, junior, senior. Defense is going to be so experienced and so good, just like it is every single year. And this is, for Iowa, a schedule that has its challenges, but also does not include an Oregon. It does not include a Michigan. It does not include a Penn State. So I think we could be looking up at the end of the year, and it goes against one of my big expectations for the Big Ten without divisions, where previously I thought that Iowa, because they were in the Big Ten West and didn't have to face a Big Ten East schedule, it's like, well, they've got a little bit of an easy path or a shortcut to be able to get to that Big Ten title game. I think we could be coming into November, and they could be very much in the mix to make the Big Ten title game here in Lucas Oil Stadium on CBS. And all they need is to be able to get a little bit of a step forward offensively, especially in the passing game, to be able to do that. I know that that's what Kirk Ferentz has talked about a lot. We'll have an opportunity to chat with him later. He's saying the right things. So if they deliver the results with the offensive improvement, then I think we could see Iowa as a good sleeper pick.
I think all these are great sleeper picks to make the Big Ten title game. But there's no sleepers who win the Big Ten, guys. Look at the history of this conference.
Hold on. No sleepers?
No sleepers at all.
The answer to sleepers is no sleepers.
The Big Ten Conference does not sleep, right? The best team wins the Big Ten. The Big Ten title game is typically a terrible watch because the good team from the East smashes the team that had the best record somehow from the West, right? These games are not competitive. We saw Iowa last year. Cool, they got there. How many points they score? Zero, right? Iowa's offense could be a little bit improved, but on talent, on body types, which of these teams has a quarterback to pair with really good defense? If you give me Iowa's defense and USC's offense, that's a great sleeper team. But the transfer portal's done closed, y'all. So that's not going to happen. This is cool to talk about in the offseason, but frankly, if you lined all these teams up, the body types of Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan, they're not comparable to what the rest of these teams run out. There's 4 teams in this league that recruit at that level, and there's a bunch of other teams that are going to play exciting, fun games to watch. But talent-wise, they're not going to win this thing. That's why I'm so confident the Big Ten is going to get 4 playoff teams. I think these 4 teams are going to dominate everybody else.
One other team that you had your eyes on were the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. You got a chance to talk to Greg Schiano a little bit yesterday. In addition to being freed from Big Ten East jail, what excites you about the Scarlet Knights?
They've been better every single year. Has been there. I think Kyle Monunga is probably one of the more overlooked players in the entire country, and he had more rushing yards than Travion Henderson did, or Blake Corum at Michigan. He put up really good numbers. again, so much of this too is I think they're going to get better quarterback play. I don't know if Calic Manis is going to come in there and light it up, but their passing game was an incredible liability last year, and they'll be able to at least have more balance, which should open things up for Monangai to maybe even have an even better year. And that was interesting that Shiano was talking about NFL-type talent. And he said, we finally have some NFL-type talent, and where I think it resides on the offensive and defensive line. And we saw them. They're not afraid of anybody. They can hang with teams, as we saw with Ohio State last year, and then just some big mistake would come back and bite them. I think if they can eliminate those mistakes, they could be a team there. And the schedule's way easier, as you mentioned.
They had a stat up here on the big board. Rutgers returns 9 all-conference performers, and that is tied for 5th most. It's like that kind of speaks to how old the teams are in this league. If you can bring back 9 all-conference guys, and that's only tied for 5th?
Well, to be fair, I think we have like 4 or 5 all-conference teams in the Big Ten.
And they don't play any of the predicted teams to finish in the top 5. Not one of them. So the schedule is there. It's gettable for them.
Could be a big year in Piscataway for sure. And they've been recruiting at a higher level. I mean, it's an interesting time for Rutgers football as they are a team to keep an eye on when it comes to sleepers. Coming up on the other side, we got a lot of new head coaches in the Big Ten, not just, new schools, but Michigan State has Jonathan Smith coming to take over. What's he inheriting, and what's the job look like to build the Spartans back into being contenders in the Big Ten? We'll get into all that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network from day 2 of Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis. A lot of new coaches joining this league. Some of them, like a Lincoln Riley, arrive as the school. USC is joining the conference. But Michigan State, a former Big Ten champion under Mark D'Antonio, also has a new head coach, and it comes in the form of Jonathan Smith. Now, Danny, he comes over from Oregon State, his alma mater, which he was able to guide, into improvement almost every single season. A former Oregon State quarterback, we sort of view him as a sharp offensive mind, and he brings over some Oregon State talent to be able to maybe help Michigan State moving forward. But, man, that roster saw some big-time exits. What does the challenge look like to you for Jonathan Smith to be able to get things moving in the right direction at Michigan State?
I think it's going to be a process, right? We talked Rutgers, Greg Schiano, started rough, and he saw the changes he had to make to the roster. How about when Smith was at Oregon State? First year, I think, was 2-10.
Yep.
You have to start and recognize, scout your own roster, and get it there. You mentioned some of the players he brings in. Aiden Childs, I'm excited about. But this was a locker room that was fractured. I mean, when you watched them play the last year and a half, 2 years, it was just hard to watch because you felt like the players knew there was a problem at the top, there was going to be changes made. It felt like they threw in the towel. I think they're going to get instant buy-in from Jonathan Smith. I think and this was one of the bigger coups that was out there. You mentioned being able to steal him away from Oregon State, and clearly some of the conference realignment impacted that as well. But I think this is a guy who can absolutely, we talk about the strength of the coaches in the Big Ten. He's a reason why. It may not reflect in the win column this year, but I think you'll see an improved team that's going to show up with better fight. The roster will be better. I just worry about the schedule. I worry about the wins coming this year, but I think even Michigan State fans realize it's going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, I think if you look at this team this year, like everything that they lost, although they've also brought a lot in, you look at their depth chart, it's a bunch of names of guys who weren't on this team last year. But I think what they have going for them is Jonathan Smith's ability as a play caller, because we've seen everywhere he's gone, his offenses have been efficient and they've put points on the board. And the one thing that he really has the ace up his sleeve is Aiden Childs, the quarterback he's bringing with him, a very highly touted recruit who he brought to Oregon State, transfers with him to East Lansing with the Spartans. And again, he's going to be an inexperienced starter, but you look at the Big Ten right now. We're here at Big Ten Media Days. All 18 schools are coming here. They're each bringing 3 players. That is 54 players. 5 of them are quarterbacks. That tells you about the quarterback situation in this league going into 2024. And Aiden Childs has the kind of ability to where if he hits his ceiling, he might be the best quarterback in the conference. And if that happens, this is a Michigan State team whose win total can really rise up into something that they can do and compete to get to a Big Ten championship. The likelihood of that happening, not high, especially if you look at the schedule, because it does have a pretty rough stretch in the middle of it. But I do think this is a team that should be improved just from the consistency at the top of the helm with the coaching change with Jonathan Smith in charge.
Yeah, I don't know how many wins it'll lead to this year, but I do think Michigan State will put a product on the field that gives fans optimism for the future, right? Aiden Childs is just a sophomore, and Oregon State was already working him into the lineup last year, even with DJU on campus here. I think there's a pretty good chance he would have beaten out DJU this year had they both stayed at Oregon State. If you look at Oregon State, they always competed with the much more higher resource programs in that league. They don't beat themselves. They also kept offensive line coach Jim Mahalzik, who's a really good coach. Like, that's a huge get if you're a Michigan State fan. Like, we don't talk O-line coaches a lot, but if you talk to other guys, they respect the heck out of that guy. They run a big variety of schemes. Jonathan Smith was Chris Peterson's offensive coordinator, for a long time when Washington was always finding ways to score points. You get Childs, you get a really good coaching staff. The transfer portal picked them clean. That's there are a lot of schools who are really excited about the guys they took off Michigan State's roster. Like Arkansas is really excited about the right tackle they took on the offensive line. Miami's excited. Obviously, Oregon's really excited about the other defensive tackle. Like, if you lose multiple defensive tackles who are at the very top of the transfer portal wish list, guys, that ain't good. But long term, I love the hire. I think the personality and the culture is a great fit for what Sparty wants to do.
So we're scheduled to have Dan Lanning join us tomorrow. Do you think he wants us to talk about that Oregon State game when Oregon State ran the ball 33 times in the second half to put them away? You want to talk about scheming them up, being able to raise your level of play? That was a Ducks team that was knocking on the door of playing for a Pac-12 title and couldn't get it done in the last game of the regular season because of some of that coach 'em up that you've got there with Jonathan Smith. But ultimately, I think, Bud, what you're saying is the big alarm for me is when the players that are leaving are going to really good programs and those coaching staffs are fired up to get them, that is an exodus that I need to take a note of. And the second thing that stands out to me is I'm starting to think that the Peach Bowl run for Mel Tucker might have been a little fool's gold.
Yeah.
You go back and you look at the really close margins in every one of those games in that 11-win season. Obviously the arrival of Kenneth Walker, and he had a fantastic year and a great individual talent, as we're still seeing as his career progresses in the NFL. And it just kind of threw all the expectations off a little bit from what you're really going to get. So your first word, process. Like, that's just what it's got to be for Michigan State in terms of what this ramp up is going to look like for the Spartans moving forward.
And this is a program played in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Yep. And perennially was at the top of the Big Ten. I mean, they had Rose Bowl after Rose Bowl with Mark D'Antonio. So I think you see what it can be if they get the right coach. And I think Jonathan Smith is that guy. It's just going to take some time.
Did Iowa get the right offensive coordinator, Bud?
That's an interesting question. I think anybody who has some track record of competency is an obvious upgrade over, the situation that we had last year with Iowa. On the show, we did the drive to 325, which we should continue this year, by the way, because Iowa has not reached 325.
You're back in the game. You've gotten another new life.
We need to run this thing out. Like, we don't quit.
Right.
Iowa's not quitters. Let's hold them to it. I do think so. Now, if you look at it, what he ran previously was a lot of like 3 and 4 wide stuff. And Iowa clearly does not have the personnel to run a lot of 3 and 4 wide. So how does he change what he wants to do to fit what Iowa's scheme is? But I think they at least have competency from the play caller standpoint. And I'm not really sold that McNamara is healthy and ready to go. Like, I want to see that with my own eyes because he hasn't been healthy in a long time. But the fact they went and got Sullivan from Northwestern, a guy who has played competently, not great, but just decent in Big Ten play, is a massive upgrade. I mean, with all due respect, like the kid they had running out there like last year, like looks like me plus 30 pounds. Like just it wasn't working, bro.
75 pounds.
Okay, yeah. I mean, he was close to 3 bills. Yeah, that was bad.
I think Tim Lester's a great hire for them. I think Tim Lester, when you saw what he did as head coach at Western Michigan, he had some good teams in the MAC. And he spent the last year in Green Bay with the Packers, working on that offense, working with Matt LaFleur, working in the Kyle Shanahan tree, which I don't know if you pay attention to the NFL, that is kind of taking over the entire professional league. And he's going to bring a lot of those concepts, which frankly, Iowa just did not run the last few years. They were just a very basic and vanilla as you get on offense. Tim Lester's bringing this newfangled thing called motion, in which a player moves before the snap to kind of make the defense declare what kind of coverage
before
it's in.
The snap.
Yeah, it's insane. I need to see it in action, but I hear he's bringing that. I don't know if they're going to be running the 3 and the 4 receiver sets. I think you're going to see an Iowa version of a Shanahan offense, which to me, you get that paired up with what that defense usually does. And we've seen Iowa win 10 games every season without an offense. If they're able to start scoring points, this is a team that's going to make some noise.
I'm a Leicester fan since he gave me a trucker hat with a little camo on it with the Bronco logo on it. That was pretty sweet.
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
back when I called
Nice.
a game when he was at Western Michigan. But I do think, I mean, it's kind of like we've talked a lot about these teams. The offense was so bad it can't get much worse. But I think they are going to take a step in the right direction. And you mentioned Brendan Sullivan coming in. That does make you wonder two things. One, the health of Cade McNamara. The other thing is, like, where do they value him? Where do they view him as the long-term starter? And they took a starter from Northwestern, so it obviously didn't come cheap. And you wonder what they were telling Sullivan to get him to leave a starting position. Clearly he's going to have better weapons, but Northwestern was good last year. They were the surprise of the Big Ten. And to get him to go there, I think it does tell you maybe what Bud's alluding to. I wonder who's going to be the starter when it's mid-October and forward. Is it Cade McNamara or is it Brendan Sullivan?
So it's Brendan Sullivan's the next Jordan Love, right? If we're going to continue, if we're just going to continue hammering home Brendan Sullivan, Jordan Love contract. Oh, we're on television right now. We don't need to juice the algorithm anymore with our trending topics. Yeah, it should be very exciting as Iowa reworks that offense and then takes a look at a schedule that could set up for a very special season here in 2024. Well, coming up on the other side, two of the schools that are here today at day 2 of Big Ten Media Days are the additions we've known about for years. USC, UCLA, they've had time to get ready for this adjustment. What does it look like for each of these programs with Lincoln Riley and Deshaun Foster? We'll get into the LA schools and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network from Big Ten Media Days, Day 2 at Lucas Oil Stadium. Well, among the crew that is going to be here today, including here on our set on the Cover 3 podcast, we are going to get visits from USC, scheduled to have both Lincoln Riley and quarterback Miller Moss. We are also going to get UCLA, scheduled to have head coach Deshaun Foster. Tom, we've had a lot of time to get ready for USC and UCLA. So before we start to get into the teams specifically, what are they going to see when they go into their first year of Big Ten football? What should they be getting ready for as they join this conference?
They're going to see a lot of Middle America from a plane window, Jim. Because I don't know if you've seen UCLA's schedule. I mean, they start their season going on a road game to Hawaii. They're coming home, then they're flying back and forth across the country all season long. And I just think that, from a competition standpoint, it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts this team going through the season, all this time traveling. And it's not just going to be UCLA, it's going to be USC, Washington, and Oregon have to deal with it as well. But it's the challenge of having to familiarize yourself with a brand new league. Like if you're James Franklin, who we'll also have on the show later, you have to learn 2 or 3 new teams because you might play them. They have to learn every team on their schedule is somebody that they have to learn. So you have that process. You have the travel going in. You also, it's a different style of play. Like the Pac-12 was mislabeled as soft for years. It was never soft, but it's a style of play offensively that is different from what you typically see in the Big Ten. And it's going to be interesting to see how they can adapt to that. Do they adapt to it? Do they say, we don't have to change. You have to adapt to us. So it's going to be that kind of approach that's going to be really interesting to watch from Deshaun Foster, Lincoln Riley, Dan Lanning, and Jedd Fisch at Washington.
Body types. Different body types. I mean, that's what you always tell me about. It's the line of scrimmage, even for the high school recruits. And, we can have NIL, we can have the portal, but who still matters? Mom and dad. And that's a big part of some of these decisions, and being able to have that regionality it leads to a little bit of a different style. Do you think that they've got the body types at the line of scrimmage, USC and UCLA, to be able to go and play some of these Big Ten teams that, while they might not have the most dynamic quarterbacks or passing attacks, they will whoop up on you at the line of scrimmage?
I think that if we could play a video game and turn injuries off, I would answer yes for UCLA. But depth-wise scares the heck out of this thing for me. Like, I think UCLA's offensive line has got enough beef, and the starting 5 could be decent. And I actually think keeping Jay Toya was one of the biggest keeps, not losing him to the transfer portal on the defensive line. Gary Smith, if healthy, is also a really nice player for them. Like, part of the reason why they had such a damn good defense last year is because all that front 7 is going to play in the NFL whenever they get drafted. Now, Behind that, I think UCLA's got real problems. And as Tom and Danny mentioned, with the grind of that schedule, good luck, because attrition's a real thing, and it's not a video game. Injuries are switched to on. So I think that the depth for both these teams along the line of scrimmage is a major problem, as you referenced the body types.
The schedule is an issue for so many reasons. One, which I know they're younger, and you're 18 to 22, your body recovers faster. Players won't think about it, but it does impact you. The other thing, and this is something coaches, like when you get your schedule and it's like your weekly schedule, every single minute is accounted for. Like they'll have off time, they'll give you some time off, but a lot of those are spent on walkthroughs and little meetings that you can't really conduct when you're on a 5-hour plane ride across the country. And then you have to schedule extra time to catch up on sleep because you might get home at 2 or 3 in the morning returning from the East Coast. I hope they've already had conversations with the networks, including ours, if they do travel to the East Coast, that they don't have to play at noon. But there's a chance that they could, which is an issue because your body clock is at 9 a.m. And that's an issue with college kids waking up, getting game ready that early. It's going to be a process. I think much like a lot of these coaches that we talked about year one, the only issue is, or the thing that's kind of interesting, is Chip Kelly had this place in a pretty good place. And I know it wasn't where they want to be, but consistently 8 wins for a few years in a row, getting some big ones. I think the expectation is going to be, well, we should very least be that. I think it's going to. Deshaun Foster played there, so he's got the backing. It's a unique situation.
He's a staffer too.
Yes. He's been there as a running back coach, which is kind of a big jump to be the running back coach to the head coach. I mean, It's not a typical route that you see to the head coach, which makes me wonder how year one is going to be. I think there's very much going to be a learning process for Deshaun Foster learning on the job.
The other thing with Chip Kelly there is he would build this team year by year through the transfer portal. He had a real disinterest in high school recruiting, and their high school recruiting at UCLA was a joke. So now that he's not around to bring in the guys to fit that specific system, and you have this coaching turnover, especially so late in the process, like when Chip left UCLA was a major detriment to UCLA's talent acquisition process, and they don't have that basis of good high school recruiting to backfill the losses that they've had. So like that to me is a concern.
On the USC side of things, this was a program that, as we mentioned earlier, was a pulled hamstring away from maybe being in the college football playoff. And last year, when they were running hot and playing well, you saw it. But there wasn't that kind of consistency. Tom, it feels like that's got to be one place where things start to adjust for the Trojans, is being able to bring that consistent level week in and week out. Because when you throw in the travel, when you throw in learning all these new teams, if you're not the same team every single week, then that's going to be a problem in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and we've talked about it on the show before. The sense you kind of got while watching USC a lot of times last year was Caleb Williams was so talented that there was kind of a sense of, we'll let Caleb figure it out. Like, okay, we're giving up 45 points. That's fine. Caleb will figure it out. We'll score 49. We'll win the game and move on. And that just did not work often enough. So there does need to be some consistency. And it will be interesting to see, because we're going to have Miller Moss on the show later. He is not the typical Lincoln Riley QB in that there's really not a lot of hype surrounding him going into the season. He hasn't won a Heisman. He's not being projected as a first-round pick to this point. It's the first time I could think of since Lincoln Riley came onto the scene where he's had a quarterback that's kind of flying under the radar, and we don't know what to expect. Although we saw in the bowl game 6 touchdowns, pretty good, pretty solid debut for a starter. But what's that going to look like going into the year? Can they be as consistent on offense and, of course, the defense?
I feel like you trust the offense with Lincoln Riley. They're going to put up points just like they did in the bowl game. You mentioned the 6 touchdown performance. I feel like he'll figure it out. He's that type of offensive mind. I think the lingering questions, which have been behind Lincoln Riley and followed him everywhere he's been, is what is the defense going to look like? Can they get physical? I mentioned the schedule in the Big Ten. Can they match the physicality of the teams they're going to go against? Danton Lynn comes in to kind of revamp it. I think it's more of a mentality that they need to bring to LA.
I think that USC really upgraded their defensive coaching this offseason. But I also believe that where they were coming from, UCLA, had a way better front seven than what USC has. Like, look at this list. Like, Bear Alexander would have played for last year's UCLA team. Would any of these ends? No. They had the Murphy twins and Latu, and they had Jay Toya, and they had Gary Smith. Like, that UCLA defensive line last year was sneakily loaded. So I think people that just expect Danton Lynn to come into USC and duplicate what he had at UCLA last year, guys, he didn't bring those bodies with him. They're still in Westwood. So I think they massively upgraded the defensive coaching. Tackling should be better. Assignment should be better. But they're not going to beat people up front like UCLA did.
Yeah, it's going back to what you're saying, if you enjoy line play, just go watch a replay of the Oregon State-UCLA game and watch Oregon State's offensive line against UCLA's defensive line. It was heavenly.
There you go. That's your assignment, but only for a couple minutes, because coming up on the other side, we got a whole nother hour here from Big Ten Media Days, scheduled to speak to Lincoln Riley, Miller Moss, Deshaun Foster, James Franklin, and so much more analysis here at the desk. Next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network from day 2 of Big Ten Media Days here at Lucas Oil Stadium. Coming up later in this hour, we are scheduled to have visits from USC coach Lincoln Riley, from his star quarterback Miller Moss, UCLA coach Deshaun Foster, and Penn State coach James Franklin. Danny, listen, what are you looking for out of some of these conversations that we've got coming down the pike?
I can't wait to talk to Lincoln Riley. He's walking over here right now about his quarterback. We talked about the game that was the bowl game, record-setting performance, but the spring game wasn't great. I want to know if that was more of a concern, or was that more of a sign of things that come on the defensive side of the ball?
I'm just looking forward to the same things Danny is. I want to talk to Lincoln. I want to find out where he thinks USC is going to be, how excited he is to be joining the Big Ten.
I want to see who is meshing with this new defensive staff. Like who's going to play better under the new system? Like who has a chance to take that leap?
Well, coming up on the other side, we are joined live at the desk by USC head coach Lincoln Riley. We'll discuss the upcoming season, the move to the Big Ten, and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Day 2 of Big Ten Media Days, and pleased to be joined here at the desk by USC head coach Lincoln Riley. Coach, how are we doing, and how's Media Days been for you so far?
We're doing well. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's good to be here. It makes all this feel more real, right? That idea that's kind of been hanging over all of us for the last year, 2 years, whatever it's been now. It's kind of cool to see it all coming to fruition, to see all these teams here together, and starts to get you pretty excited about all the matchups that are coming up this fall. Including
at Michigan on CBS. So, speaking of the move to the Big Ten, you played and coached in the Big 12. Conference USA with the Pirates, the Pac-12. You've been around college football your whole life, but it's always been looking at the Big Ten from the outside. So what has been your perception of Big Ten football, and how does that influence how you're trying to prepare your team for the change?
Yeah, I mean, I think the perception, growing up was you have the visions in your mind of teams playing in inclement weather, right, of like 18 tight ends on the field at one time, right?
Iowa's still doing that.
That's right. The league has certainly evolved as we've studied it. I mean, it's evolved like all of football has. It's not not as different, I think, as a lot of people would think when you really look at the tape. It's still ball, but I mean, you talk about iconic venues, some great programs, the history of this league, the different markets and areas of the country that you're going to get to play in, and then you add in Los Angeles, you add in some really tremendous teams from the West Coast that join it. What's the combination all that going to be? And that's what everybody's tuning in to see, right? That's why all the excitement is there. And I think whether it's fans, players, coaches, media, all of us, I think, are excited to see what it becomes.
We were talking here before we popped on camera, and we in the media have been dissecting the West Coast teams new to the Big Ten, having to travel so much. And you were just sharing with us that it's not that much different than what you guys have had, being a national brand already, the travel. Is it something that is negligible when you look at the schedule?
I do. I just don't really see it being a huge factor. I mean, you've got a couple of games a year that you're going to fly a little bit further than you did. It's like I told somebody earlier, it's not like we're going on horseback, So, I mean, like we're, you watch a couple more movies throughout the year and you're there. And so, and we get the added benefit of, when we play a game on the East Coast and we fly back, like we're getting ready to do here in a few hours, we're going to gain the hours back. When you start talking in terms of, preparing for the next week, the players' bodies, the coaches' time, all that, it's a significant difference. And so everybody's going to have to deal with it. The NFL's been doing it for years. Like I think it's something we'll talk about now, and I actually think after the first year it won't be talked about a whole lot.
I also think, too, the one side of it that is rarely brought up is everybody talks about the extra traveling you guys have to do. Everybody else in the league has to fly out to you guys just as well. So it's not just USC, UCLA, and Washington, that Oregon, they'll be dealing with it. You were talking a moment ago about the excitement and everything with the move. For you personally going into 2024 and your team, what are you most excited about with this team that you've seen so far?
I would say two things. I would say one would be the momentum coming off of the Holiday Bowl. And I wouldn't normally reference a game the previous year, maybe as much as I have, but it was such a unique setup because, we played without a lot of our older players. We essentially played the game with a lot of what we're going to be playing with this year. It was a lot of these guys' first time, maybe on that stage or to play that prominent of a role, and just excited about how the team handled it, the vibe of the team going into that game. I was excited about how a lot of the individual players handled it. And I think that was a country's first chance to see kind of behind the scenes what we've been building. While you've seen the product that we felt like we had to get ready to compete on Saturdays in the fall the first couple of years, there's also been a building kind of behind the scenes of what we want to be. And so I think just how that came together was really cool. And I think the other thing is just maybe just the overall trajectory of the program. I mean, we took over a team that had won 4 games the year before, and we've won 19 in the first 2 years. We have let a couple slip away that we were right there and had a chance to do even more. We're getting ready we have started construction on what we believe is going to be the best college football facility in the country. We've got a new athletic administration. We're in a new conference. It's a new coaching staff. It's a new roster. I mean, there's been an overall in every sense of the word, but it's been fun. And it's, seeing it start to come together has been pretty exciting.
You mentioned some of the positivity, the momentum built in the bowl game was around Miller Moss. His performance, 6 touchdown passes, he was awesome. And somebody that not a lot of people knew about him. I was thinking about this because, he's in a unique situation. He has to follow a number 1 overall draft pick. He has to follow a Heisman Trophy winner. You've had these conversations before because you've been in this position before having to replace that. What do you tell him as far as approaching this season and try to fill those shoes, which is probably impossible?
Yeah, you should be himself. That's the number 1 thing that you can do is just be yourself. And that was even important going into the bowl game. It's like you've earned this opportunity to play in this game by being you, not by being anybody else, and that's key. And like you said, I think I've had the added benefit of having some other high-profile guys, and then having the next guy right after them, and that's what it's about. And so now Miller's a really good player. We got a really good quarterback room. I love the room. I love the competition in there. We lost a really good player, but I'm very confident in that room's ability to produce.
You've had a lot of very good players in your quarterback room over your time as a coach. Question I have for you, you've had Caleb Williams, you've had Kyler Murray, you've had Baker, you've had Heisman after Heisman, first pick after first pick. If you're building your ideal quarterback from the guys that you've coached, who would you pick? Arm strength, leadership, accuracy, mobility.
Yeah.
How would you put that
Frankenstein
together?
this. Let's go.
This is good. Now, this would make recruiting a lot easier, right? I would say, Jalen Hurts' durability and just, I think, mental toughness. I would say Kyler's, quickness and his competitiveness. I'd say Baker's mind for the game and his energy. I would say Caleb's elusiveness and probably arm talent. You have that, you got a pretty good start.
That's a pop star. It's a pop star prospect for sure. You talked about the new staff. The defensive hires were a big part of the transition from 2023 to 2024. What were some of your motivations? What were you looking for when you sought out to go and make those hires?
Yeah, I knew it was going to be, obviously important decisions for our program and the future of our program. And it was the way it all happened. Like, we had 6 weeks between the end of the regular season and the bowl game. And, I'd been charged with putting together a staff, obviously, just a little bit prior when I took the SC job. And it was interesting to me. We were able to hire, good people the first time around, had a lot of interest, but even this time was even different. It was just the interest in this job was extraordinary. It really was, from the NFL, from college. Some really highly respected people. And so, but as soon as I talked to Coach Lynn, I just kind of had that feeling like this is the right guy. The turnaround that he orchestrated, the NFL background, the way he teaches and develops. what he believes in schematically. Like, we were just very much in sync, it felt like, from the first conversation. And then that had a benefit of being able to put around him, a staff that's, Matt Ince, our linebacker coach, the head coach of North Dakota State, won 6 national championships there. I may have shorted him one. Eric Henderson was the D-line coach for the Los Angeles Rams. Leaves coaching Aaron Donald to come coach our D-line. Doug Belk was the D coordinator at Houston, came in to coach our secondary. We hired a phenomenal staff around Coach. So, yeah, it's been fun to see it come together. You can feel that momentum and excitement, particularly around that side of the ball within the program with our guys on the field, and certainly could see that this spring.
What about that personnel on the defense side of the ball? I think he has 5 new projected starters in the transfer portal. Last year was Bear Alexander. He contributes. What about the personnel on the defensive side? Yeah, I think, the area that we addressed the most was the secondary. We lost a couple of really good players, had a couple of guys graduate, have a couple move on. That was the area that we were most aggressive in the portal, and really pleased with all of the guys that we brought in there. I would say the depth, the talent, and the length in the secondary is going to be the best that it's been since we've been there. And then I think the defensive front, we've really worked hard from a recruiting perspective and development perspective the last few years to build that. And you start to see some of those young guys getting ready to play and contribute. And we've worked hard to change the body types, because this style of front and the way we're going to play is much different than we were before. And so certainly getting bigger, both in recruiting and in development, to be ready to attack this the way we want to.
He is Lincoln Riley, USC head coach. Thank you so much, Coach, for joining us here at the Cover 3 podcast. Best of luck this season.
You got it. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Coach.
Coming up on the other side, scheduled to be joined by his quarterback, Miller Moss. Joins the set next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network, Day 2 of Big Ten Media Days at Indianapolis, Lucas Oil Stadium. Pleased to be joined at the desk by USC quarterback Miller Moss. Miller, what a tremendous lead-in to your 2024 season with your record-setting bowl performance. Do you think that you can recall all 6 touchdowns from the Holiday Bowl?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it. I definitely could.
Yeah, it's a big game.
I definitely could. But I can recall a lot of plays, so it's not specific to those. I don't want to get it twisted.
Okay. So this is obviously your first time at Big Ten Media Days.
Yes,
USC's bringing in, and it's going to be your first time going into the season as a starter.
Yes, sir.
How has your preparation this offseason been different than what you might have been doing last year when, with Caleb around, you knew you weren't going to be the starter?
Right. I think when it comes to my preparation, I think as an individual, I think it's been the same. I think I try to prepare the same way no matter what, try to be consistent in my work, and I feel like I've done a good job in doing so. I think as a leader and as someone whose job it is to bring the team together, I think that's where it's really been different. So as part of the leadership group of the team, it falls upon myself as well as some of the other guys to bring the team together, to establish the team's identity. I think that's where my role has been different than previous years.
I'm sure you've been asked this question a lot, but what did you learn from watching Caleb?
A lot. I think if I could pick one thing, it would just be his absolute confidence in who he was as a player. As you know, that's so pivotal in playing the quarterback position, and whether he threw for 605 touchdowns or he threw a pick or had a bad practice, he was the same guy every single day, and that confidence he had in himself as a player never faltered. So that was really cool to see, and it's definitely something that I try to take on going forward as well.
You talk about the leadership group trying to establish the identity.
Yes, sir.
What is the identity of USC football in 2024?
Right. Yeah, I think it's a team that's really selfless and puts the team before the individual. And I think that sounds really nice, and that's what we've really tried to build, but ultimately that gets tested in your biggest moments of adversity. So I'm excited to see how that foundation we've built fares in those moments.
What was it like, we mentioned you spent the last couple of years behind Caleb on the depth chart.
Right.
Caleb won a Heisman. He was the first pick in the draft.
Yes, sir.
But there was also speculation in the offseason, even after your bowl game, that USC was going to be active in the transfer portal for a quarterback. How big of a confidence boost was it for you that Lincoln and the coaching staff said, no, we don't need to go out and find a quarterback in the portal. We have our guy in Miller Moss.
Yeah, I think it was a huge confidence boost. Obviously, I'd had extensive conversations with Coach Riley about, my position and my standing, not only leading up to really leading up to the bowl game. But I think the biggest thing for me in that time was not to worry about speculation or what could possibly happen, but to worry about getting prepared to go play a football game. And I think I did my best to drown out the noise or whatever narrative may be circulating the team and really just go play. And I think it's a good lesson in general to kind of ignore whatever narrative may be out there and just go take care of business, and hopefully things will work out. Not to say they'll always work out like that, but I think if you don't do that, then you're not giving yourself a chance to succeed in the first place.
So you won't be throwing 6 touchdowns every game.
I mean, I definitely plan on throwing some more touchdowns, but yeah, I mean, that was obviously not just for me, but I mean for the entire team to have a difficult back half of our season that was somewhat disappointing, and then really come together for a common goal and go perform in the way that we did, not only the offense but the defense as well, really stepping up, I think was huge for our team and showed us a lot about what we could do in coming together, and that really springboarded us into the next offseason.
One of the issues for your guys' team the last couple of years has been the defense, right? You guys go out and get a new defensive coordinator. There's nobody to help us preview it than you, who you got to face them in the spring game.
Right.
And I know they had some success. I remember looking at it, and it was like, all right, did the quarterback struggle, or was it more about the defense?
Right,
so you tell us, I mean, give us a little scouting report of what we can expect, because there's a lot of excitement about what Danton Lynn brings there to USC.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in going against Coach Lynn, like, it's really made me better and forced me to be better as a quarterback. I think you kind of understand his NFL pedigree and background in going against him, and that you have to continue to make the next right decision against whatever he presents you, because if you don't and you try to take risks and you try to gamble, he'll make you pay for that. So, I mean, obviously the spring game was a good preview. I hope we can continue to have that much success on defense, and I'm sure we will. Obviously, you don't really know until you get into a game, but I'm really excited about what I've seen so far and excited about that group going forward.
Have you played College Football 25, the video game?
I have.
Okay, all right, let's get in.
Of course.
Are we Road to Glory? Are we Dynasty?
Dynasty.
Okay, who's your squad?
I started a Dynasty with Bowling Green.
Yes, there we go. That's a good pick.
Yeah, so one of my really good friends did Akron because his dad played there, and then one of my other really good friends did Coastal Carolina. So I was like, all right, like I'm going with Bowling Green, and it's been fun so far. You know, the rebuild's the most fun part.
Yep.
Like when you're winning national championships, then it's like, all right, I got to get a new job.
Right.
But it's been fun.
Are you old, like the passing game? I haven't played. I'm the only one on here who's not a gamer. But the one thing I've heard is how complicated the passing game is. As a quarterback, have you been able to figure out the new passing style?
Yeah, I think my settings are just on like traditional.
The classic.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people are doing that.
Yeah, I'm really liking him with every single answer more and more.
So yeah, we don't try to overcomplicate it. It's more about where the ball goes, you know,
Yeah.
not like how many buttons you press when you throw it to him. So I don't know. I'm not a huge gamer either, so that would probably be a disadvantage for me if I was doing some complex passing.
It's called a video game. We're supposed to have fun.
Yeah,
you know,
right, exactly.
If we've got USC's quarterback saying, you know, traditional's the way to go, it's definitely the way to go. So have you checked out your own like rankings and ratings? We've got some connects at EA Sports. Is there any adjustments that need to be made when the new patches and updates come out?
I was honestly very impressed. Like they had my wrist tape, they had the towel, like the helmet was right. I was very impressed with like the visuals of it. Started off as an 85. I don't think that's bad, but
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's not about where you start; it's where you finish. You know.
Yeah, let's
Which I think is one of the coolest things that they're actually going to upgrade.
Yeah, that's awesome.
The
Yeah,
rankings
absolutely.
throughout the season.
But yeah, I mean, aside from all the like, it was very easy to get obviously caught up in what your personal ranking is. But I mean, I played that game growing up. I played Road to Glory, and like, obviously before I was recruited at all, like, got all the scholarships and went different places. So just to be part of the revival of that game is really, really cool.
Are you excited to go to the Big House on September 21st?
Absolutely.
What is that? What's that going to make you feel? You say you're a college football fan growing up.
Yes,
What
sir.
excites you about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I went there during recruiting, and it was empty. So
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see what that looks like when it's full of 110,000. Maybe we'll have like 4 or 5 for us, but but when it's full of 110,000 people, I'm really excited for that environment.
Yeah, it's very loud. I'm just trying to think, you know, you're going on the road to Michigan, but you're also starting the season in Vegas against LSU.
Yes, sir.
Like, how are we feeling about ourselves going? I mean, obviously, we've still got to go through camp. We've still got some
Right.
time, but that's a huge game to start the season. It's kind of a statement kind of game, I think, for both programs.
Right.
What are you looking at when you look at LSU as the one thing that you think is going to be the biggest challenge, and what do you think is something that you can is maybe your best strength in that game?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I think that's kind of the game. Like, those are the kind of games that you come to USC to play for. So I think we have a locker room that embraces that and is really excited for that opportunity. When it comes to them, obviously they're a very quality opponent. I think the most difficult thing for us is obviously they have a new defensive staff. So we have no film of the previous year of their defense. So that's going to be the biggest struggle, and I think there are definitely some opportunities for us offensively, but we understand that we're facing a quality opponent and really excited for that opportunity.
Who are you excited to throw to this year? I mean, you got to say them all. I think it's a politically correct answer as a quarterback, but who maybe that we haven't seen? Anybody younger talent we don't know about?
Yeah, I think one guy that's not necessarily getting a lot of ink and is going to really surprise people is Mekhi Lemon. He was forced to play DB for us. I think practiced 2 weeks and ended up on the field against Oregon playing defensive back after doing the entire offseason as a receiver. So really just a football guy to his core. Phenomenal route runner, really attacks defensive backs. And it's just really a phenomenal dude and hard worker, so I'm really excited to see what he's able to do.
He didn't say Zach Branch.
Yeah, I mean, like, I thought I was going to say, just get the ball to Zach. I tried to shed some light on it.
No. We really do appreciate the insight. He is Miller Moss, quarterback for the USC Trojans. We will see you on CBS September 21st for that game at Michigan. Miller, thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the Cover 3 podcast.
Yes, sir. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Coming up on the other side, we've still got visits scheduled from UCLA coach Deshaun Foster and Penn State coach James Franklin. We'll get into all that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Big Ten Media Days here at Lucas Oil Stadium as we anxiously await the arrival of UCLA head coach Deshaun Foster. Already got a chance to hear from Lincoln Riley, from Miller Moss. We're doing a little L.A. corner right here of the show. Tom, what'd you make from our time with the Trojans head coach and star quarterback?
Well, I really enjoyed the Miller Moss interview. I was very impressed by him, and because we've never had a chance to talk to him. We've never really seen him talking to the media publicly in this kind of platform. So it was the first chance to really get exposure to him, and I think I was very impressed by a lot of his answers. And I also like, Bud, you'll like this. He actually gave a sleeper wide receiver for us to be on the lookout for instead of just naming Zach Branch as the best guy on the team.
Yeah. That's good stuff.
Jacoby Land or Mekhi Lemon?
Mekhi Lemon.
Okay. Yeah. Who said was playing DB. And they switched him over to receiver. That's a good sign if they move him over from that position. I thought it was really cool talking to both of them. There's the positive vibes. It's 0-0, right? You don't have anything going. I thought it was interesting that they said Lincoln was telling us, he gave a little bit of this on air, but he said the actual difference in travel is only 6 hours of additional airtime in the airplane, which is pretty minimal when you do think of it as like it's a couple extra miles. So I thought that was interesting because we've made such a big deal. I think it's going to be a bigger issue. UCLA has to travel further. That was interesting that it was like, we're kind of used to this. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, UCLA's total travel is the circumference of the world.
It's the Magellan schedule. They are going around it.
Yeah. We'll have to ask about that. Danny, I'm positive vibes through the roof with those two. I'm going to fall head over my heels. I'm going to call USC a sleeper team. I mean, that is what you wanted to hear after a hot start. A finish that was so disappointing in the back half of the season for USC, then to be able to be going into this year with so much positivity, I think that USC fans should feel encouraged after checking that out.
You know what else was really interesting? And I remember this conversation I had with Mark Richt because I asked him, I had to replace Charlie Ward, who was a Heisman Trophy winner and won a national championship, and it was the first in school history. And I remember Mark Richt telling me, you aren't Charlie Ward. And I was like, hello, I know that. We're a different style of game. But he said, don't try to be him. You run the system. You make the reads. You make the decisions, and everything will work out. And I thought it was pretty interesting that Lincoln Riley said pretty much the same thing to Miller Moss. And how do you replace Caleb Williams? That was really interesting that Lincoln Riley's had this conversation, three times before with the Heisman Trophy winners that he's had and #1 overall draft picks. But he said, hey, you just be you. And I think as long as Miller Moss does that, doesn't try to do too much, doesn't try to play outside of him or the system, I think he will be fine.
We've got also expected to come up a little bit later on in the hour, scheduled to have a visit from Penn State coach James Franklin. Tom, what are you looking forward to hearing from Coach Franklin?
The thing I'm looking forward to most is you doing your James Franklin impression.
To his face.
James Franklin. Second, I would say I want to hear what he has to say about how the offense is looking now that they have Andy Kotelnicki in as their new offensive coordinator. They brought him in from Kansas. I want to know if we're going to see what we're going to see. How different is it going to be? Is it going to be more run heavy? Are they still going to be trying to throw the ball around a bit much? So that's the thing I'm going to ask James first.
I want to hear about the player development, right? I mean, like, Penn State did not take a whole lot of guys in the transfer portal. To me, like, Penn State has resources. So the fact that they kind of stood pat at a lot of positions, who's next up for them? Like, who should we be excited about? Because they have to have some internal excitement for them not to have attacked the transfer portal, maybe as hard as some of their fans wanted them to.
I want to know why he didn't bring his quarterback. I mean, I'm not going to be here on the set, so I want you to ask. I have a hunch I know why. A lot of teams use it as a reward for upperclassmen, guys that have been around a little bit longer. Drew Aller's still younger in his career, but I don't want to give him a hard time about that. I mean, you got to bring your QB. That's the face of the program.
Here comes the QB defender.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's what I want to make sure we give him a hard time for that.
Nobody else on the team matters. It's
he needs to build his brand a little bit more, get more NIL money.
So maybe he's got some Dabo to him. I'll tell you where the transfer portal is. It's in that locker room right there. That's my transfer portal right there. Yeah, it's the way that Penn State is positioned going into this season. We put them above the line, right? Yeah. We say top 4 teams draw a line, and they are above that line. Where do you think that could change for Penn State this season? Like, what would be your concern if you're a Penn State fan?
Eliminating an Aller injury. I would say the receiving core. I do think they will be able to run the ball. I think I mentioned earlier in the show, Andy Kotelnicki is a very good when it comes to scheming up the run and getting open lanes for his running backs. But you're still going to have to pass the ball if you're going to compete at the top of the league. And we have seen in the last couple of years, Penn State just hasn't had the dynamic receiver that it was having every year for a while. And I think that they got Julian Fleming in the transfer portal, and I think he's a very big add for them. I think he's a good player, but he's not like the game breaker number one. He's going to catch 80 balls for 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns kind of guy. So we need to see somebody step forward as a go-to option for Drew Aller in the pass game if they are really going to compete.
The difference in scheme when I was at Columbus watching Ohio State, Penn State, and seeing now Marvin Harrison's Marvin Harrison Jr. That's different, but he was still schemed open a lot, and it wasn't only him. They had Ibuka had a couple big catches, and he's running with like 5 yards of separation. Compared to when Drew Aller was back there, he was a little jittery, but he also didn't have anywhere to go with the football. I mean, they were like stride for stride. They were covered. And I think that's going to be a huge reason because you can have a different play caller. We have to have guys that can get open too.
Yep.
Julian Fleming, I think, is a great addition, but I also want to see, do they take a step forward with the other guys out there? Because you can't have to just rely on one guy. They got to give him some guys to throw to as well.
Yeah, Drew did not throw with great anticipation last year. I mean, he was very, very safe with the football. I mean, 25 touchdowns, 2 picks. So I think Andy Kotelnicki is going to have to earn his money and scheme guys open because so far Drew does not seem like a quarterback who's willing to throw that 50-50 ball, right? It's got to be open. But luckily for him, that's what Andy did at Kansas. I think that's why James Franklin went out and got him. Like, guys are running wide the heck open on those Kansas. Like, wait, where's the defenders? Not on the screen. Not on my TV screen. So we'll see if he can do that with Penn State.
Yeah, didn't matter. You got Jalen Daniels, electric playmaker. He goes down. Jason Bean comes in. Results are still there, and being able to maintain that is a really, really big part of the plan, I think, with Andy Kotelnicki as we look ahead to what Penn State is going to look like. What about from the UCLA side? What are some of the big questions that we've got for the Bruins?
It's a brand new coaching staff. Deshaun Foster, who will be joining us here on the desk momentarily. It's his first year as a head coach. You've got Ethan Garbers at quarterback, so at least you have experience at that spot. But we talked about earlier in the show, they had one of the best defensive lines in the country last year, and a lot of that talent is gone. Jay Toya is back. Will they be able to maintain that level of play on that side of the ball? Because that was a key for the Bruins last year.
Receiving core, I think, is awesome for them. Can they get them the ball? Can you pass protect?
All right, and we are being joined right now by UCLA coach Deshaun Foster, making his way to the stage here on the Cover 3 podcast. Coach, thank you so much for joining us.
Swap out and take the hot seat.
Let's go on, man.
All right.
Deshaun, good to meet you. Nice to meet you, Tom.
Hey, Chip.
Oh, another Chip.
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Is it Charles also?
It's Carl.
Oh, okay.
Is it Carl? Yeah. All right. So still live here on CBS Sports Network on the Cover 3 podcast. This has been quite an experience for you. You know, you get the job. You've got a lot on the to-do list, from assembling the staff, working on the roster. Now that you're here at Big Ten Media Days, is it almost a relief that you've hit it and the season is here?
Yeah, it's almost like we're close to the finish line.
Right.
just to finally get to ball, you know. But it's been a blessing just to be in this position and be able to be the head coach at your alma mater, you know. So I'm pretty excited, and I'm just looking forward to the season.
It had to be like drinking from a fire hose, taking over so late in the process, you know, given when Chip left. What was that process like, you know, taking over so late?
It was, I mean, it was something I've never done before, you know. But I mean, it wasn't necessarily ideal, but it didn't really hinder us as much, you know. I was just focused on getting some offensive coaches so we can install the offense before spring ball. Mm-hmm. That was my number one.
So what would you say then to this point, because obviously the season hasn't started yet, but what has been the biggest challenge for you so far taking over as the head coach of this program?
It was just mostly getting the NIL together, mm-hmm. you know. That component wasn't where it needed to be, but I think that it's trending in the right direction now, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Is that the university community? You know, where are some of the important places that you need to reach out to make sure to get that mobilized?
It was just mostly giving guys access and letting them see the program. You know, it's kind of hard to donate to something if you don't really know much about it or what's going on. You know, so I wanted them just to come see it, come be around it, and you know, once you feel like you're a part of something, you'll want to give.
Yeah, for sure.
That was the thing.
Am I wrong to think you guys have one of the best receiving groups potentially in the Big Ten? Like, I look at this list, like that, you guys got some real players here.
Yeah, that's probably my deepest room on the team. You know, from J. Mike to Rico Flores to Titus to Logan Loya. You know, we're about 5-6 deep, so I'm pretty excited about that. And then I'm really excited about Ethan Garbers too. So, you know, he had a really good spring. He was able to continue to play well. You know, he was the MVP of our bowl game, and he didn't even start the game. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I'm pretty excited just to see what he can do if we can keep him healthy.
You know, we had Lincoln on here a couple segments ago, and we were talking about joining the league. One of the bigger challenges now is the travel. And Lincoln was saying for him, he doesn't think it's that big of a deal. For you guys, though, you're starting the season with a road trip to Hawaii, mm-hmm. and then you're coming home, and then you're flying to the East Coast, and then you're flying home. For your weekly preparation, how do you plan around that, knowing that you're going to have to spend a little extra time traveling this year than you have in the past?
It's going to be the same thing, because if you want to play at the next level, you're going to travel. Those first two games that you mentioned, Hawaii, LSU, we won't be in school. Mm-hmm. So that's okay.
So that's a bonus,
So those other two East Coast games, those are truly going to be during the season, and Penn State and Rutgers, and, you know, just the nature of the beast. You know, being in this conference, you're going to have to play a couple games like that. But there's some teams in the ACC that have a real travel, you know, so I don't think it's really going to affect us too much. I think our guys might be more affected of being in bigger stadiums, you know, bigger crowds, going to Penn State. Not necessarily the travel, but just being in the stadium. So I think I'm going to try to find ways to neutralize that, like letting them see the stadium before the game and stuff like that. So
you mentioned your time in the NFL. But this year in college football, we get helmet communications, which is new. How much do you think having been in the NFL is a benefit to your staff?
That's huge. Huge. One, on offensively, coach already knows how to use it and how it can help him. You know what I mean? Defensively, Coach Akaika Malloy is he's still figuring out, because he only used it in the bowl game. Sure. But it's still an advantage, you know, going from sign language to now English. Yeah. Right. You know, being verbal, it's just completely different. So it would have been, that could have been difficult if we didn't have that.
You joked up at the podium that the players don't want to hear much about your playing career, but what can you pass along to them that you think has been valuable in terms of being able to let your experience be another tool in your coaching toolbox?
It's just more of giving them the experience and not necessarily the football stories.
Yeah.
You know, because they want to hear about the experience, because I've done something that they all want to do. You know, I think that's why I was able to be so successful with the running backs, is because I had guys that believed what I was telling them, and then they would just go do it. So my number one goal is just make sure I just do that on a bigger scale with the rest of the team.
You know, last year, one of the strengths of the Bruins team was its defensive front. You lost a lot of key players. You also kept a key one in Jay Toya. Who have you seen in practice so far heading into the season that is giving you kind of confidence can step into that role and be a big-time player and maybe a disruptor?
Coming off spring, Busick did a really good job playing defensive end. Femi, my middle linebacker, he had a great spring also. Devin Kirkwood had a good spring. Jalen Davies. A couple safeties came in and played well. So it's going to be more of a collective thing than just having a top 15 pick.
Yeah.
You know?
Those are nice to have.
Exactly.
They help for sure.
Yeah, to have more of a top 15 pick. So I'm excited to see which guys step up. You know, I saw a lot of guys step up in spring, and now when we're coming into this training camp, I really want to see who takes their game to the next level. So
Gotta ask, do you play the EA Sports college football video game?
I have not yet, but my sons have been killing me trying to get me to play.
All right, let's go back in time. What would your ratings have been? Overall, speed, agility, break, tackle, acceleration.
Overall, I'm going to go 95.
Okay.
Speed, let's go 92. Agility, I'll go 95 again. Break tackle, I'm going like 98.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember watching it. It's definitely 98.
98. Yeah. Awesome. That's about it.
One last one for you here. What do you want people to think about when they think of the identity of Deshaun Foster's UCLA Bruins?
It's basically going to be my pillars. You know, it's going to be discipline, respect, and enthusiasm. So if you cut on a game, and you should be able to see that win, lose, or draw, you should be able to go out there and see on my team, like, that team is disciplined, they play with respect, and they're having fun. So that's the number one I'm just preaching. I want guys to get out there and have fun, man. This is a game. It's a fun game, you know? It's the ultimate team game, so have fun doing it.
That's awesome. He is UCLA head coach Deshaun Foster, guiding the Bruins into year one of its Big Ten era. Coach, thank you so much. Good luck this season.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Coach.
you.
Coming up on the other side, we're scheduled to be joined here at the desk by Penn State coach James Franklin. We'll be talking about the Nittany Lions and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Big Ten Media Days, and pleased to be joined here at the desk by Penn State coach James Franklin. James, how's it going so far today? You're very used to this, but this is an 18-team league. This is a big 3-day event. How's your day been so far?
I'm in the fourth quarter of it now, and I love your energy. I gotta start by saying that. But no, it's been good. I do think it's exciting having the four new teams in our conference. Very different. We got Washington coming to our place for the whiteout. We're going to USC and playing the Coliseum. It's a little bit more challenging and difficult for us being one of the most Northeast teams. I don't know if all four of you guys have been to Happy Valley. It's not the easiest place to get into. It's not the easiest place to get out of. So that creates some logistical challenges for us. But in terms of the competition, the excitement, I think it's really good for college football, and I know it's good for the Big Ten.
Well, you mentioned the excitement, and we're heading into the season. Camp will be starting soon. What are you most excited about seeing from your team before the season starts as you get ready for the year?
I don't know if it's one thing specifically. Obviously, we've got a new coordinator on offense, got a new coordinator on defense because my defensive coordinators continue to get head jobs. We've been down this kind of road a bunch. But we open in a great venue. I was at the University of Maryland. We played at West Virginia a bunch of times. That's a tough place to play. They ended the season on a real positive note. There's no pro team. It's all about the Mountaineers. That's a hornet's nest we'll be walking into. I think our opening games at Auburn, even at Purdue to open the season, they were tough games. So I think those things help prepare us for this.
James, you guys use the portal some in the offseason, but we're pretty selective in doing so. To me, that has to mean you're excited about some of the guys who'll be first-year starters. Top of mind, like, who are the guys you're really excited to see start for the first time?
Well, I think the first thing is this. I think, number one, you probably go to the portal a lot when you lose a bunch. And we've been able to keep our roster for the most part. I think that's telling of our culture and the type of locker room we have, so I think that's positive. But then be able to go to the transfer portal almost like in the old days how people have with junior colleges. You got a weakness, you got a hole in your roster that you need to fill. We've been very strategic about it. For the most part, we've been able to go get guys out of the portal that we recruited out of high school. Chop Robinson is a perfect example. It came down to us in Maryland. He wanted to stay close to home, goes to Maryland. Things don't go the way he wants to. He comes back to us. But it's not us trying to get to know a kid in 2 weeks and make a decision to add him to our family. That's hard to do. So we've been able and fortunate to really go to the portal and get guys that we recruited out of high school. We knew their families. We knew them. We knew the type of player they were. We knew strengths and weaknesses. And I think that's been valuable. So we're going to try to continue to do that. We're not opposed to the transfer portal. We've worked really hard at putting that locker room together, and we want to be very selective about who we put in there.
When you had to make those staff hires, what did you see from the Kansas Jayhawks that attracted you to hiring Andy Kotelnicki as your next offensive coordinator?
Well, again, kind of like what I just talked about in recruiting, right? I've known Andy for a long time. I got a ton of respect for Lance Leopold and what he's done in his career. Followed him. We played him when they were at Buffalo. Followed him what they did at Kansas. I was at K-State for a number of years. What they've been able to do at Kansas is super impressive at a place that hasn't had a ton of success on the football field. But probably the biggest thing is we were really good last year, even on offense. I know people don't want to hear that, but if you look at statistics, we're pretty good. Our issue was we weren't explosive enough.
Right. And
we weren't able to score when it mattered the most against our biggest opponents. So you go and you look at Andy and you study what he's done in detail, one of the most explosive offenses in college football. But here's the other thing, not just explosive in one area. If you're just explosive in the passing game, you can defend that. If you're just explosive in the run game, you can defend that. But it's explosive in the pass, it's explosive in the run, it's RPOs, it's play action passes that look like RPOs, it's motions and shifts. What people don't realize, motion shifting is great, but it can confuse you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean is the whole idea on offense is how do you keep things simple as possible for the quarterback and the O-line? Well, you motion and shift, you ID the front. At the last second, a linebacker enters the box or a safety enters the box. You haven't accounted for him. The ball snapped and he's unblocked. So how do you use motion and shifts to cause stress on the defense but keep it simple on us? Little option. You know, you look at Drew, wouldn't say he's Lamar. Like with the Ravens, right? I wouldn't say that. But if you watch tape last year, he made more plays with his feet than people would think. So just having a little bit of option in there to keep people honest, it changes everything for you offensively. So that's what we're excited about, the ability to create explosive plays, but do it in a ton of different ways.
You bring up Drew. Last offseason, obviously, we go into the year knowing he's going to be the starter. He has had one season under his belt. What have you seen this offseason that's different in his preparation, having gone through the wars now as the starter?
Yeah, I don't know if it's that, but it's just year two. Like the value, it's no different than coaches. Experience matters. Quarterback position, experience matters. So although he did some great things that I don't think enough people talk about, he had the second best touchdown to interception ratio in the country.
25-2.
Yeah, and no one talks about that. Like 25-2. You ask any coach in the country, would you take a 25-2 touchdown interception ratio? I think he completed his first 315 passes, which is a college football record for starting your career. So he did some really good things. I think the biggest thing is just those experiences. The games that he'd like to have back, the passes that he'd like to have back, the checks that he'd like to have passed, to be able to learn from them, be able to grow from them. The leadership role. Last year, to be honest with you, we were just focused on him being the quarterback. Don't try to be a leader, just be the quarterback. This year, being a quarterback and one of the leaders on offense, and he's done a phenomenal job. His preparation and approach has always been really good, but it's just year two.
Coach, we only have 40 seconds. You guys have a reputation for producing absolute beasts here. They kill it on the field of this combine. 9 months from now, who of your guys are going to light the combine up, potentially?
Oh, shoot. As you know, we got a bunch of those guys. That's not where my headspace is right now.
All right, top off-season performers.
Yeah, I would say there's some guys that probably, are not part of everybody's conversation right now. Aldavian Collins is a guy that had an unbelievable spring and offseason that no one's talking about, that there's a lot of excitement in the Lash building about.
He is James Franklin, head coach of the Penn State Nittany Lions. James, thank you so much for spending some time with us here at the Cover 3 Podcast.
Thank you.
We will continue our coverage of Big Ten Media Days, and you can get the Cover 3 podcast anytime. Just scan that QR code. You can check us out live Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time at youtube.com/Cover3 or download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts.